Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hello and welcome to our special in-camera board meeting. Oh, hold on. I think I'm on the wrong agenda. 1 minute. Where are we here? That is absolutely the wrong agenda. Sorry, folks. Just bear with me as I find the right agenda, or if someone can email it to me in the time it takes me to find it, that would also be appreciated. Oh, hold on. I think I found it. There we go. Hi, everybody. Apologies for that. Welcome to the Board of Education School District 61 special board meeting on the budget. First, I want to start by acknowledging the Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Can I please have an approval of the agenda? Moved by Tom, seconded by Trustee Whitaker.
I actually have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so just before we approve the agenda, I just need to raise a concern. As you're aware, Chair Painter, neither Trustee Duncan or myself participated in the deliberations or decisions leading up to the censure and purported suspension of Trustee McNally and Trustee Painter.
Trustee Whitaker, I'm gonna pause you there, Trustee Whitaker. I'm gonna pause you there. That is an in-camera discussion.
No, well, so my question is I need to know the specific legislative authority that was used.
Trustee Whitaker, I need to call you to order. That was an in-camera discussion. It is not meant.
Speaking to the announcement publicly made on February the 11th. I'm not talking about any in-camera discussions.
I'm calling you to order.
So I would like to know what legislative authority was used and which section of the School Act enables the board to suspend its members, because I'm concerned that any decisions made here this evening will be invalid. I've looked and I'm unable to find any provisions.
Trustee Whitaker, I'm calling you to order, please.
Can you answer the question, please?
Trustee Whitaker, I've called you to order several times. I'm going to ask that you please comport yourself appropriately so that we can do our work. Now we have an agenda that has been moved and seconded. I would like to discuss the agenda.
I did not second that agenda. I'm sorry, I had a question.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve the agenda. Can I have a seconder, please?
Pardon me, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded by Trustee Leonard.
Excuse me,
Now that we have the agenda on the floor to be discussed, I will recognize Trustee Duncan.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chair. I'd like to amend the agenda to add the following under C, new business.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
That the Board of Education of Greater Victoria, number 61, direct Chair Painter to write to the learning community, including all stakeholders, rights holders, and the Minister of Education, to explain what power and authority the board relied on to support its decision to suspend 2 trustees out of the 9 trustees elected to the Board of Education in October 2018. And I'm happy to email that as well.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Trustee Duncan. I appreciate that. Okay, so that amendment has been made to the agenda. Is there any further discussion on the agenda as proposed? Yes, Secretary Treasurer, go ahead, please.
We don't usually, it's at the will of the board, of course, but especially called meetings don't usually have agenda items added because the board has not had an opportunity to consider the item. So that's just some advice for the board as it moves forward.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Of course, the amendment has been made. It is up to the will of the board if they want to accept it. So are there any further amendments to the agenda in front of us? Seeing and hearing none, can I first get an approval, a vote of approval for the addition to the agenda? Okay, and those opposed? For those who are, I know Trustee Hensa is traveling, so if you want to comment in the chat, Trustee Hensa, you can with your vote. I know you're mobile, so we can record that vote, and perhaps Andy can read it out to us if Andy is present. Or if not, Trustee Hensa, if you are there, you can text it to me as well. We're trying to. Just want to make sure Trustee Hensa gets her vote in. Trustee Hensa, if you want, you can text it to me as well. I know you're mobile. Is Andy present possibly? Is he able to see if Trustee Hensa sent him?
Yes, my apologies.
Did Trustee Hensa send you a chat with her vote?
There's nothing in the chat.
No, it's
Yeah.
not going to come to you, Trustee Whitaker. It's going to go to Andy. Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, and what was her vote? Can you just read it for us?
Is aye.
Okay, so then that is added to the agenda. Thank you. Now the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of the agenda as amended? And any opposed? Trustee Ferris, not sure, didn't catch your vote there on the amended agenda.
Excuse me, I am opposed. I stuck my hand
You're
up when I
opposed.
came back on. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like Trustee Hensa approves. So the amended agenda is approved. So we'll go now to amended annual budget, amended budget bylaw readings. I will turn to the Secretary Treasurer to introduce us to this piece, and then we will go into the recommended motions. Secretary Treasurer Morris.
Thank you. So we're here this evening to have an update on the amended 2021-2022 budget that was previously approved on June 3rd. This is a regular occurrence to give 3 readings to the amended budget by February 28th in order to meet the ministry's deadline. And I'm going to call on Associate Secretary Treasurer Katrina Stride to walk us through the amended budget this evening.
Thank you. I think Andy's going to share the presentation with you.
Okay, you should be seeing the full screen presentation now, Katrina.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you.
You can go to the next slide. And I know we just did this, but I would also like to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Next slide. So my name is Katrina Stride, Associate Secretary Treasurer, and we're presenting the 2021-2022 amended annual budget this evening. Working closely with Kim Morris, the Secretary Treasurer, but special recognition going to Julie Lutner. She's our Director of Finance, Budgets and Financial Reporting. And Julie has been spending the past several months working on the amended annual budget. It's an incredible amount of work, as you can imagine, and I just really want to acknowledge her dedication to this work, especially as we have already started work on our preliminary budget for the next year. So the 3 of us are here to hopefully answer any questions that you have. And I think it might work best if we take a little pause at the end of each slide. And if you have any questions, just feel free to jump in with them. And if there is a slide coming up that might better address your answer, I'll let you know. But I think it's going to be easier to deal with it that way than to ask all of the questions at the end. You can, next slide. So as we do our budget work, we always try to keep in the forefront of our minds that we're looking to the strategic plan, the board work plan, the framework for enhancing student learning, district operational plan, and school growth plans as we align our resources and budget allocations to student success, all centered on the student learning experience. Next. So in June 2021, the board approved the 21-22 annual budget. There was a 254 million budget bylaw that was based on estimated revenues and expenses. So as Kim mentioned, the ministry requires boards to approve an amended annual budget by February 28th. So our amended annual budget bylaw is about 273 million, and it's based on revenue and expenses that are tied to our actual enrollment at September 30th, plus any new revenue and expenses that have been confirmed after the annual budget was approved in June, and any expenses that are related to unspent budgets from the prior year that we plan to spend in the current year. Public sector accounting standards require us to budget for the operating, special purpose, and capital funds. So we'll touch on each of those funds in the presentation. And this slide references the schedules and statements that are in the ministry document that's included in your agenda package. Next. These are just some of the highlights or more significant changes between the annual and amended annual budget. So enrollment is up by 450 student FTE, which means our operating grant is also up. Keeping in mind that due to higher enrollment, we have variable operating expenses such as staffing and supplies that will also be higher. International program. In our regular program, we're up 127 FTE, which is 15.88%. And the short-term program, we have 73 more students, which is up 23.32%. So this increased enrollment has resulted in 963,000 gross profit, increase in gross profit. Rental income, we're looking at an increase of about 620,000, and that's just related to the opening up of external rentals and some new rental spaces, which I'll touch on in subsequent slides. We also had some new revenue sources. So we had a Restart Health and Safety Grant of 457,000, and a mental health in schools 113,000, and both of those are in the special purpose fund. Thanks. So we talked about this at audit committee, and as things start to recover and we move to near normal, we just thought it was important to highlight the fact that our operations are still being impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and probably will for a little while to come. So just to highlight some of the ongoing impacts that are that have had an impact on our amended budget. So we have additional technology purchases, additional bus cleaning charges by our contractor, increased ventilation and heating costs. Our international enrollment, while it has increased quite a bit, is still not fully recovered to pre-COVID. I think back in January 2020, we had projected 956 students, and we're currently at 902. Investment income is down $1 million from 2018-2019 due to decline in interest rates. We have a lot more absences, which means we have higher replacement costs. So our TTOC costs are up $2 million from prelim due to increased absences. Travel and Pro-D expenses are down, again, due to limited Pro-D and also higher travel risks. So we're just not traveling like we were before. And we've had some additional cleaning at schools, purchase of masks, sanitizers, and mental health supports. Those have been funded through one-time special purpose grants. So this slide is a comparison of the operating fund from annual to amended. We will look at the revenue and expenses and the prior year surplus appropriation in more detail in upcoming slides. What this table shows is that our revenue is up 9.4 million and our expenses are up 9.9 million. The net expense is 0.5 million, and that's related to the spending of the prior year surplus. We don't have any planned interfund transfers for capital. We did budget to spend from local capital. So this slide is the projected accumulated surplus at the end of 21-22 compared to the prior year. So if you look at the column that says increase, decrease, I'm going to focus on that. You can see that our projected accumulated surplus is down 6.1 million. So under project budgets, see the $1 million. The difference between last year and our projection for this year is that last year we received a holdback grant from the ministry. Right at the end of the year was 600,000. And it was carried forward to 21-22 and we plan to fully spend it this year. There was also 200,000 in managed print strategy, which is how we purchase our copiers, print devices, and it was 200,000 that was carried forward at the end of 2021, and it will be fully spent in the current year. And there was also curriculum and learning support funds of 200,000 carried forward at the end of the year, planning to be fully spent or not carried forward at the end of this year. School level funds are down just under 100,000. These are unspent budgets in schools, and they're really governed by that reserve policy, which allows schools to carry forward the 40,000 in elementary and middle and 80,000 at secondary. So we've just looked at what has been spent and made an estimate on what we think might be left at the end of this year. Purchase order commitments is really just based on last year with some inflationary increase. It's really hard to know exactly what that will be until we get to the end of the year. The 4.8 million, that was the surplus from 2020-21 that was used to balance the 21-22 budget, and it will be fully spent in 21-22. Jumping down to infrastructure initiatives. So those are down $1 million. Those were 3 projects that we carried forward at the end of last year. So year 1 of 5 for network infrastructure, year 2 of 2 for shops upgrades, and also Vic West Portable. And the projected unappropriated surplus, that's what we're projecting that we will have as an unrestricted surplus at the end of 21-22. And it's made up of 100,000 unappropriated surplus plus 460,000 of projected unspent project budgets that are considered unrestricted, and 230,000 of projected unspent international education budget that we think will be in excess of what is required for carry forward requests. So if you look down on the bottom, there is a line that says surplus. So surplus is referring to that $7 million number as a percentage of operating expenses in 21-22 is at 3.17% compared to 6.27% in the prior year. And if we just want to look at the reserve, those are the items in the table that are identified as by the letter B. So the 821, 721, and the 425. So combined, they're just under 2 million. As a percentage of operating expense in 21-22 is at 0.88% compared to 0.93 in the prior year. So just under 1%. The letters that you saw in the previous table kind of tie to this slide, the 7.1 accumulated surplus. So the items that were labeled with A, the project budget, school level funds, PO commitments, we don't have really any discretion around those. They're either contractual, externally targeted, or they belong to the schools. The reserves identified by the letter B, 2 million. These are reserves that the board has already approved to hold as reserves last year. And the 0.8 million, or this just under 800,000, those are the funds that we have discretion around in spending. Okay. This is quite a long list. It's an itemized list of the changes in revenue and expenses since the annual budget. Some of the items you will see have been reported out on the budget change report that Kim presents at Ops. And the remainder are adjustments that Julie made when finalizing the amended annual budget. So you can see up top, you see, for example, increase in enrollment-based funding. And then you can look in the expenses, and there is staffing and supplies expense increase due to higher enrollment. So when we adjusted our budget for the increased enrollment, you see the increase in revenue and increase in expenses. We will be detailing more of these in later slides, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I do want to draw your attention to one item in particular. That's the electric bus purchase for $190,000. You probably recall in June 2021, the board approved to finance $195,000 for electric buses with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and Association of School Transportation Services of BC Credit Facility for the purchase of 4 buses. At that time, the interest rate that we were earning on our deposits was 1.45% versus the 1% financing rate that we would be charged to finance those purchases. And our interest rate has dropped down to 0.95%, which is actually lower than the financing rate. So given that we actually have cash on hand, we're recommending that we just purchase outright and not borrow for those buses. Just want to mention the draft policy, the policy 3170 operating surplus. It was formerly called board reserves. There's a link there. Essentially what the policy is saying is that we should be holding a reasonable unrestricted operating surplus. And the reason we do that is to mitigate risk for emergencies and unexpected changes in revenue and expenses. So having a surplus would allow the district to maintain regular operations without any interruption in service provision. Ideally, our surplus would be 2 to 4% of the previous year operating revenue, and our current reserve is just around 2 million, which is about 1%. So we're slightly under the ideal amount. Looking specifically at revenue, this ties back to Schedule 2 and 2A if you want more detail. I'm just going to highlight the larger variances. I'm just going to move my pictures. So the operating grant is up by 5.9 million. The reason for this increase is school age enrollment is up by 450 FTE, which is 3.7 million. We have increased funding for unique student needs of 1.7 million. Most of that is for special education or inclusive learning. 1.6 million of that, and 157,000 for Indigenous education. We also received 516,000 supplement for salary differential. And that's because the average teacher salary at our school district is higher than the provincial average. Jumping down to provincial grants other, there's 59,000 there. Those are grants that we get from other ministries, not the Ministry of Education. So we have an after school sport and arts initiative grant. We've had that one for several years. There is a ERASE grant, and that's a grant to help mitigate impacts of gang-related association. And then we also include in that line sale of surplus assets at public auction. Tuition, $2.7 million increase. Most of that, or all of it, is related to international tuition. So as I mentioned, our regular students are up 127 FTE, short-term up 73 students. Very small offset is that our continuing education and distributed learning registration and course fees are down, just because we've returned back to our near normal in September. Other revenues are up 155,000. Reason for that is we don't have a French language assistant this year, so that's 27,000. That's down in the current year. Cafeteria revenue is up 56,000, and that's likely a recovery from the COVID impact in the prior year. International fees are also up. So these are fees related to activities, homestay, placement and monitoring, and credit card convenience fees. And our miscellaneous revenue is up by about 50,000. So those are our donations, vendor rebates. We've had some sale of scrap metal. They're a little bit more difficult to predict year over year. Rentals and leases are up 624,000. So as I mentioned earlier, rentals have opened up to external clients this year. And we're also seeing some new revenue coming in for the new childcare spaces that have opened up. So we've had 4 new long-term license agreements since July 2021. Okay. Operating fund expenses. So now we're looking at salaries and benefits. This is tied to Schedule 2B. I'll just highlight the larger variances. Teachers are up 2.8 million. So we had an increase of 24 teacher FTE due to enrollment growth. Also, as part of the balancing strategies, when we approved the annual budget, the district took a risk and reduced the teacher salary budget by 513,000 to account for historical hiring lags, vacancies, and average teacher salaries to actual. We actually had to add it back because, and another 100,000 because the average teacher salary is coming in higher than we budgeted. Principals and vice principals are up 162,000. There's some step increments, some of them temporary, and a reclassification of a school vice principal originally under teachers, also temporary. EAs are up almost 900,000. This is tied to the increase in the special needs enrollment. There was also an adjustment against that to account for unfilled vacancies. Other professionals are up. We did adjust for any changes that had happened since the annual budget was approved. And the amended budget includes an exempt severance expense. Substitutes are up quite a bit, 1.9 million. Again, as part of our balancing strategy, when we approved the annual budget, we took a risk and didn't increase the average number of daily absences per teacher, even though it was trending that way. And in the amended budget, we had to add a 1.7 million back to cover the increase in the average number of daily absences per teacher. Employee benefits are up 1.1 million. And there are wage sensitive benefits. So anytime you see salaries increase, you'll see the benefits increase along with them. And operating expenses continued. So services, 2.3 million. There's quite a few increases here. Legal is up 203,000. Digital services recovery, 170,000. International ed agent fees and facilitator contracts are up $1 million. We also have software maintenance and support increases and a number of miscellaneous contracts, including 50,000 for the recruitment of our new superintendent. And also added in there is the surplus budget from the prior year that will be spent in the current year. So we had some larger numbers in pathways and partnerships for contracts that we have with Camosun for dual credit courses and their other programs. Then just dropping down to professional development and travel. Those are down by 39,000, and it's really just a result of COVID-19 and limited Pro-D opportunities and travel risk. Supplies are up 380,000. This is just an increase due to schools and departments spending their carry forward budgets. It also includes an offset of the 820,000 operating reserve was included in the annual budget that we won't be spending this year. Utilities are up 128,000, and it looks like it's due to increased natural gas costs, likely resulting from increased ventilation due to COVID. Okay. Operating fund, dollar per student FTE. This is Schedule 2B, and it just shows the budget divided by the total ministry operated grant funded FTE, so no international students. It just shows how much is spent in each category for each FTE. The highest being teachers at 4,780. And if you add together the total salaries and benefits percentage of the total expense, we spend 90.2% of our expense budget on salaries and benefits. The total expense per FTE in the amended budget is $11,228, which is up $249 from the annual budget. Okay. Special purpose funds. So these are tied to Schedules 3 and 3A. These are separate funds that are set up to track revenue and expenses that are received from the Ministry of Education or other external parties. And there's restrictions on how those funds can be used. We don't allow transfers at all from operating or capital. And the larger funds that we will highlight tonight is school generated funds, Community Link, and Classroom Enhancement Fund. Okay. So school generated funds, these are the funds that are collected at the school level. They usually come from parents or PACs, community members. They're used for field trips, activities, lunch programs, and fundraising. This graph is showing you the 2020-2021 year compared to 2019-2020. So both of these years, we have to keep in mind, were impacted by COVID. And we didn't use the current year because we don't have full information for the year. Community Link. So this is ministry funding, and this funding supports 5,800 vulnerable students in 16 of our schools, 2 alternate programs, plus 4 families of schools for youth and family counselors. Not all schools receive Community Link funding. The schools that do receive the funding, the students in those schools receive support through allocations of food, school-based counselors, teachers, EAs, and youth and family counselors. Okay. So this chart just shows how the Community Link budget has been broken down. 1.7 million, or 40% of the budget, is spent on salaries and benefits. 2 million, or 48%, is spent on contracts. So that's the youth and family counselors and 2 social workers. 260,000, or 6%, is spent on food, and 263,000, also 6%, is spent on supplies. Next. Classroom Enhancement Funds. Again, ministry funding. So this is funding that is given to us to offset the costs that are related to the implementation of restored GVTA collective agreement language as it relates to class size and composition. So we've got 19.6 million of funding, funding 151 enrolling teachers, 28 non-enrolling teachers, FTE, D35, which is low incidence prep time and remedies, and then also some overhead. So teacher leave provisions for the 179 teacher FTE, 2 custodians due to the additional classrooms, and 1.286 QP947 FTE in HR just to handle the increased staffing and the remedy tracking. This slide is a comparison of the revenue between the annual and amended budget, and I'll just highlight the larger variances. So the first one is in the provincial resource program. This is ministry funded, and the reason it's gone down is there was a position initially funded at SET BC, which has been subsequently returned to the province. School generated funds, we're showing an increase of 1 million. As you saw or mentioned in the previous slide, school generated funds, there has been an impact by COVID on those funds, but we're anticipating an increase by the end of this year. Community Link up by 122,000. And that's basically because we had a higher than expected surplus at the end of last year. Classroom Enhancement Fund, 3.2 million. The ministry doesn't allow us to budget for revenue that hasn't been confirmed. So when we created our annual budget, they had only, we could only budget for a portion of expected staffing grant until the funding was confirmed after September 30th. So now that funding has been confirmed, we've added it in. And the remedies grant, 100% of it was waited until it was confirmed in September 30th. So the next one down, the First Nations student transportation, mental health in schools, changing results for young children, and the restart, health and safety. So these are either new and or they had unspent prior year funding. We didn't have confirmed funding amounts until after the annual budget was prepared. So that's why there weren't any numbers included in the annual budget. The federal Safe Return to Class Fund was a fund that was in the prior year. Again, we didn't know when the annual budget was prepared how much would be remaining at the end of the year. Okay, capital fund tied to Schedule 4. So capital expenditures relate to land, buildings, computer hardware, software, vehicles, furniture and equipment. Funding sources can include grants from the province, so the Ministry of Education. We also received some funding for the childcare spaces through the Ministry of Children and Family Development. We have funding in local capital and also transfers from operating and special purpose. Most capital expenditures are capitalized, so they become assets and are amortized over their useful life. But there are a number of items that are considered maintenance expenses. So they don't meet the criteria of an asset. When we incur those costs, we recognize the revenue and the expense in the capital fund. So ministry, where we would have a bylaw, for example, would be Mount Doug window replacements, asbestos inspections, painting, and any kind of replacement, so lighting, flooring, roofing, and electrical. In local capital, we see repairs and maintenance to our childcare facilities, as well as repairs to our student devices like iPads and Chromebooks. Next. So in the capital fund, this is tied to statement 4. Projected acquisition of tangible capital assets, we're looking at 28 million for all funds. The 250,000 in school generated funds, looking at what's been spent year to date. We've got some playgrounds, outdoor furniture, computer technology in there. Local capital, inclusion for learning strategy. So that's been in place for a few years now, and they're creating inclusive spaces at schools that don't already have them. Sundance Bank, as you know, opened up in September for their kindergarten class, so furniture and equipment for that. Technology, including educator and student devices, tech packages, and then also the $1 million that the board approved school and department operating purchases of capital. That will be a transfer at the end of the year. And then deferred capital revenues, so 28 million. These are our major capital projects and some minor ones. Vic High and Cedar Hill. And we've got a couple of playgrounds, North Ridge and Lake Hill. Various projects through the annual facility grant, school enhancement program, and the carbon neutral capital program. And then also 10 schools will be receiving childcare spaces through the MCFD funding. And next. So I will pass it over to Kim, and I think she will, well, actually we'll see if you have any questions. And then pass it over to Kim to walk you through the readings. Thanks.
Katrina, would you like me to stop sharing or keep sharing the slide?
Yeah, sorry, I realized I was on mute as I was talking. If we could just stop share for a sec, Andy, and then we can go and see if there are questions about the presentation. And thank you, Katrina, for that fantastic presentation, bringing us all the way through. There's really important pieces here for us to consider. Really appreciate it. Any questions at all? And if not, we can go back to the Secretary Treasurer. Yes, Nicole, go ahead, please.
I just wondered if I could trouble Andy to see the motions, the slide with the motions on it, just briefly.
Sure, let's pop those back up.
Reshare, absolutely.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, you should see them now.
So yeah, we'll have essentially the first two motions, first and second reading we can do tonight. And then the third motion wherein the board approves all three readings in one night. And then the third reading in which the treasurer, secretary, treasurer, and chair would sign off, seal, and authorize. Any questions from trustees? Nicole, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Andy, for sharing that screen again. I just wanted to circle back to the electric buses. And thank you, Katrina and Julie, for all the hard work that you put in and the team getting us to this place. I appreciate the extra kind of details and the presentation was very helpful. In terms of the electric buses, understanding correctly that there will be a motion to rescind the previous board motion from 2021, where we directed staff to utilize that low interest loan, and then a new motion to direct that the funding for the electric buses come out of the appropriate capital fund.
Yes, that would be the intention if the board goes forward with the amended budget tonight.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions or comments on the presentation? Seeing and hearing none. Elaine, did you have something? Sorry, I saw you go off mute.
Sorry, I was just going to put the first motion on the floor.
Perfect, thank you. So I have a mover. Can I have a seconder for the first motion? Seconded by Trustee Ferris. And just for folks, the first motion is that the Board of Education of School District 61, Greater Victoria, amend annual budget bylaw 2021-2022 in the amount of $272,964,571 be read a first time. Any discussion on the first motion? Trustee Duncan and then Trustee Whitaker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My recommendation to the board at this point is to table all of these motions. I know we're on the first one, but I think in light of where we are as a board, we've got some work to do to clarify whether we can even properly convene a meeting of the board at this stage. And I appreciate that we have some deadlines here, and that this year it happens to be the 28th of February, which puts some added pressure, I know, on staff to, if we are to table these things until the board, and these motions until the board meeting on Monday, and that would require that all three readings be carried out at one meeting. But, I just think we're at a place where I just don't see any other way around it. So I wondered if we could entertain a motion to table the motion until the board meeting on the 28th of February.
Okay, there's a motion to table until the 28th. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Trustee Whitaker. So the debate is on tabling till the 28th. The debate is on tabling. So if you do or do not support tabling, you can speak on that. Trustee Duncan, you can, of course, continue as the mover. You can speak further if you'd like, or if you've said your piece, that's fine too. Okay. Trustee Whitaker, as the seconder, you can, of course, speak now, and then I'll go to other trustees.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone as well for the presentation. I always appreciate them. But I will agree with Trustee Duncan. Without further clarity about the authority for the suspensions, it's my opinion that this board must be invalid, and that implies that we are no longer properly constituted. And until that is rectified, I just don't think we should be doing any actions and passing any motions. So I agree with Trustee Duncan.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion to table? Elaine?
Well, I disagree with the motion to table. I think that there is a motion that's coming up further on the agenda. If we have passed these motions and something changes at the between now and the board meeting on the 28th, we could pass all three again at the 28th if that's the will of the board. But I think that we need to move forward with first and second reading at least tonight, and then we can have third reading at the board meeting. But I think that we need to move forward as a board, and that's what we are right now, still a board of trustees. We've not been told we're not a board of trustees, so I think we need to move forward. And clarity, I'm sure, will be coming at some point in time, but I have all the clarity I need to move forward with these motions as a member of the board.
Thanks, Elaine. Any further comments or questions on the motion to table until the 28th? Trustee Whitaker, you've spoken on the motion already. Trustee Waters, go ahead, please.
I'm not clear. Is there specific information that we're anticipating?
Question to the mover. I'll put that to Trustee Duncan if you want to provide clarity on that, or not. That's up to you.
Well, I'm expecting that when we get down to new business, we'll get a chance as a board to discuss where we are and how we move forward. But what I'm referring to is the situation that we find ourselves in, which is that there is a lack of clarity about whether we are properly constituted in light of the suspension of 2 out of the 9 trustees. We have had numerous stakeholders.
I'm not looking for a debate. I was just wondering if there's any specific information that you're anticipating to come forward that would make sense to delay a vote on the first set of bylaws. And I'm not hearing any specific information other than more debate, which I look forward to, but I don't know how it impacts the budget bylaw.
Well, if I may, through the chair, clarify from my perspective. If we're not properly constituted as a board and without having that clarity, we, in my view, should refrain from undertaking any kind of board business until we get that clarity. And I'm appreciating that puts staff in a very difficult situation and a very tight timeline this year, because it is a requirement to have that amended budget completed and I believe submitted on the 28th, which would mean that we would have to do all 3 readings at our board meeting on Monday, assuming that we are able to get the clarity that we need to ensure we're properly constituted. I'm not sure what else I can add.
So where's the clarity coming from, I guess, is what I'm curious about. Is there something that's going to happen that we can look forward to, or?
Well, I sure hope
I can't give you that clarity.
Or are we just looking to delay?
All right, I'm just gonna bring everybody back to the motion on the floor, which is to table till the 28th. I hear you, Trustee Duncan. Thank you. I also hear Trustee Waters as well. Is there any further discussion on the motion to table? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor of tabling the first motion till Monday the 28th, please signify. And those opposed, please signify. And the motion to table is defeated. So we're back to the main motion. Is there any discussion on the main motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question on the main motion. All those in favor? And those opposed? Trustee Duncan and Trustee Whitaker opposed. The motion passes. Second motion, that the Board of Education of School District 61, 2021-2022 amended annual budget bylaw in the amount of $272,964,571 be read a second time. Can I have a mover, please?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Leonard, seconded by Trustee Ferris. Any discussion on this motion, please? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of second reading of the amended annual budget bylaw, please signify. And opposed? And that carries with Trustee Whitaker and Trustee Duncan opposed. Finally, that the Board of Education of School District 61 agree to give all 3 readings of 2021-22 amended annual budget bylaw at the meeting of February 22nd, 2022. Can I have a mover for that motion, please? Moved by Trustee Leonard, seconded by Trustee Waters. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, the motion is on agreeing to give all 3 readings this evening. All those in favor? And opposed? And those opposed, trustee Duncan, trustee Whitaker. So the motion is defeated because it must be unanimous in order to give all three readings. So we will bring third reading back on February the 28th. Business arising from the budget bylaw. Secretary Treasurer Morris, is there anything we need to address here, or can we move on to new business?
You can move on to new business. And huge thank you to Katrina Stride and Julie Lutner for their work.
Absolutely. Katrina and Julie, always the finance team, undaunted in their work. Thank you. And we'll go to new business, which is motion from trustee Duncan. I know trustee Waters was having some connection issues. So trustee Duncan, could you please kindly reread your motion for trustee Waters so she has the benefit of it?
Certainly, yeah. So through the chair, the motion was that the Board of Education of Greater Victoria direct Chair Painter to write to the learning community, including all stakeholders, rights holders, and the Minister of Education, to explain what power and authority the board relied on to support its decision to suspend 2 out of the 9 trustees elected to the Board of Education in October 2018.
Thank you. So the motion is moved. Do I have a seconder for the motion, just to make sure we have it on the floor? Thank you, trustee Whitaker. Trustee Leonard, I saw your hand up, but before we do, I just want to make sure trustee Duncan has an opportunity to speak to it. We have 4 minutes left in this meeting, so I want to make sure we tighten this up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I'll be brief. I want to hear from my colleagues, but from my perspective, given the overwhelming, in my view, outpouring of very, very clear concerns from numerous stakeholders and one of our rights holders, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but actually multiple rights holders. It's unclear to me at this point that we are properly convened and what the actual authority was to suspend 2 out of the 9 trustees on this board. We need to address this. It's going to be very difficult to proceed to do our work without our partners around our table engaging in the decisions of this board. So I hope that folks will understand and support the need for urgent action on this. And that's all I'll say for now, but thank you.
Thank you, trustee Duncan. Trustee Leonard, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
I'd like to move referral of this motion to the board meeting for Monday, where I think it's a more appropriate venue for discussion of it. So motion to refer.
Okay, so I have a motion to refer to Monday the 28th. Do I have a seconder? Jordan, okay. Discussion on, so this is a discussion on whether or not to refer the motion to Monday's board meeting. Elaine, did you want to elaborate any more since you moved it?
No, I think it's just a more appropriate venue. As was pointed out, this people arrived at this meeting expecting a budget meeting only, and they weren't expecting this motion to be here. So I think the board meeting is a more appropriate venue.
Especially given that we have 2 minutes left in this meeting to discuss this. Trustee Whitaker, go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, it's a hearing that we only have the 2 minutes left. I guess I'm disappointed because essentially I've gone through the School Act. I've done section 33, 52, 53, and I just can't find anything in the School Act, and I'm not getting any clarity from my colleagues as to what is the authority, the legislative authority to allow this. So I'm just concerned, and I was hoping that we could get an answer sooner, but it just appears one isn't forthcoming.
Thank you. I will go to trustee Waters. Trustee Duncan, can I get you to close? Just because you've spoken once, if that's
just
okay.
Want to point out we're speaking to the motion to refer. Although
Thank
at the same time, I will point out that the mover and the seconder of the motion didn't attend the meetings where our authority was discussed by legal counsel. So that could have helped.
Yeah, we're just, thanks for that. We're just not, it's very important that trustees remember that we don't speak about in camera presence or absence motions, voting, if it's in camera. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, so speaking to the motion to refer, our ability to properly constitute a board meeting, there isn't anything, in my view, more relevant or more in need of timely redress. So if as a board, we can't find 10, 15 minutes to sit in this meeting in order to consider this point, this is something that needs to be addressed in a timely fashion. And I would say that it's in our best interest and in the best interest of our learning community for us to address this matter as soon as possible, and certainly before we convene another board meeting. And I think further, the idea that it's not an appropriate venue to add an item, a motion to new business at a board meeting, regardless of whether it's a special board meeting or a regular board meeting, to me is just not right. So I hope that folks realize this is really important. And that we take the action tonight to get the ball rolling, to get the clarity that our learning community is very, very clearly telling us they need.
Yeah, thanks for that, Trustee Duncan. My impression is not that trustees don't think this is important. My impression is that trustees are concerned about the time that we have to properly discuss this. Of course, if you desire, there is capacity within our bylaws to call a special meeting. We have alternatives. There are things that can be done. I invite you. I have reached out to every trustee at the board table to discuss. Everybody has my cell number. Everybody has my email. I'm happy to have a discussion. All it takes is a phone call. In any event, the motion is on the floor to refer to the 28th. I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, those opposed of referring to the 28th?
I voted in favor of referring. Sorry there.
Okay, can we just try that again? So all those in favor of referring this motion to the board meeting on the 28th? And those opposed? And the motion to refer carries with Trustee Whitaker, Trustee Duncan opposed. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Trustee Leonard, seconded by Trustee Ferris. All those in favor? And opposed? And none opposed. That